It was just after sunset on April 26, 2024, when the quiet of Grosvenor Road began to break. South Euclid, Ohio, a small, tree-lined suburb east of Cleveland, was settling into another spring evening. The air was mild. Children had already gone inside. Porch lights flickered on in sequence, like a slow heartbeat across the neighborhood. Inside one of those modest homes, at the corner of a quiet block, a 19-year-old girl named Nia Patterson paced alone. To anyone outside, nothing seemed unusual. The Patterson-Bates residence looked like any other two-story house in the neighborhood. A small porch, white siding, the hum of a television behind drawn curtains. But inside, tension had been growing for years. Arguments had blurred into silence, silence had hardened into distance. By night's end, that silence would be shattered by the sound of gunfire, and a mother's life would end at the hands of her own child. At 9:43 p.m., a neighbor heard what she thought were fireworks. 7, maybe 10 sharp cracks echoing through the night. A woman's scream followed, then nothing. Within minutes, police radios came alive with call every officer dreads. Unresponsive female. Possible gunshot wounds. South Euclid patrol units sped toward the address on Grosvenor Road. When the first officers arrived, what they found inside was chaos. The living room lights were still on. Furniture was overturned, and dark streaks marked the walls and floor. Upstairs on the hallway carpet lay Angela Bates, 47 years old. She'd been shot multiple times. Nearby stood her daughter, hands raised, trembling, expression vacant. The first word she spoke would define everything that came next. "Yes, sir," she said, almost whispering. "I shot her." Officers secured the scene as paramedics rushed in. Body camera footage later confirmed the brief, surreal exchange. "Where's your firearm?" an officer asked. "I dropped it somewhere outside," Nia replied. "Did you shoot her?" "Yes, sir." No shouting, no resistance, only the eerie calm that sometimes follows irreversible violence. Downstairs, other officers combed through the rooms and found shell casings scattered near the staircase and the front door. A black handgun lay discarded in the yard. The Ring camera mounted inside the home had recorded fragments of the confrontation. In the video, Nia can be seen descending the stairs moments before the shooting, the weapon visible in her left hand. Her voice is barely audible, words muttered under her breath, the tone strained and furious. "Why you make me do this?" she says. Seconds later, the screen flashes white with the first muzzle blast. When police reviewed the recording later, they saw something that would haunt them. After the final shot, Nia stood motionless for nearly a full minute, then began pacing, repeating a prayer she'd memorized as a child. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." It is one of the most chilling details in the record, the sound of a 19-year-old praying over the mother she had just shot. As medics worked to save Angela Bates, officers led her daughter outside in handcuffs. The night air was cold, and blue patrol lights flickered against the siding. On the body cam audio, Nia's voice drifts in and out. "I'm sorry," she says. "She made me do it." Then again, almost pleading, "I love y'all." Angela was rushed to university hospitals in Cleveland, but the damage was too severe. Despite emergency surgery, she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The cause of death, multiple gunshot wounds to the torso. Inside the patrol car, Nia continued talking, to herself, to God, to no one in particular. She murmured, self-defense, regardless of how y'all put it. Then, moments later, "Just pray for me, y'all. I'll never kill nobody ever again." The officers didn't argue. They recorded everything, noting the trembling in her voice, the way she alternated between tears and calm detachment. One officer later described it as watching someone drift between two realities, the horror of what she'd done and the disbelief that it happened. As dawn approached, investigators began piecing together the timeline. According to dispatch logs, the first call had come from inside the house itself. It was Nia who phoned 911, reporting an unresponsive female. She waited on the line until officers arrived. The timestamps from the Ring footage, the shell casings, and the body cam video painted a scene of eruption rather than premeditation, but as the investigation deepened, that assumption would soon change. At first glance, it might seem impossible to understand what could drive a young woman to turn a gun on her own mother. But beneath the surface of that tidy suburban home lay years of pain and grief few families could survive. The story of Angela Bates and her daughter was not one of sudden madness. It was a final collapse of a life already weighed down by tragedy. Angela Bates had endured more loss than most people could fathom. In the years before her death, she had buried 3 of her children, each lost to separate acts of gun violence. She had become a public advocate, speaking at events across Cleveland about survivors of shootings and the need for stronger prevention programs. Just 3 months before her death, in January 2024, she stood before state legislators during National Gun Violence Survivors Week, describing the hole left in a mother's heart when her children are taken by bullets. "I don't want another parent to go through what I've gone through," she told the crowd. Her words were broadcast on local news. And then, on April 26, 2024, she became another statistic in the very crisis she had fought against. By the time the sun rose over South Euclid, the neighborhood was sealed behind police tape. Reporters gathered on the sidewalk, filming live segments in front of the modest house where the previous night's horror had unfolded. Neighbors brought coffee to the officers standing watch. Some cried quietly. Others whispered that they'd heard shouting before the gunfire. No one could make sense of it. In those early hours, detectives learned that Nia had been living with her father in recent months and had only just returned to her mother's home that week. The reunion was meant to be a fresh start. Instead, it became the breaking point. When questioned later that night, Nia's father told police that his daughter's behavior had grown erratic since her teenage years. She'd struggled with depression, bouts of aggression, and what he described as episodes. She had written about violence in her journals and often spoke as though she believed she was destined for tragedy. "She told me she'd been planning this for months," he said. "She talked about killing people in her journal, said her mom was out to get her." Police reports from 2019 and 2020 confirmed years of tension in the home. Officers have been called multiple times for disturbances, Angela reporting her teenage daughter missing or refusing to obey curfew. None of those incidents escalated beyond warnings or mediation. Each time, the system reset and moved on. Each time, the pressure inside the household built a little higher. Now, those old case numbers became a haunting paper trail of mischances. That morning, as detectives cataloged evidence, they found 9 spent shell casings, bullet holes along the hallway wall, and a trail of footprints leading toward the back door. It was by every standard a domestic homicide, but one that defied comprehension. At the police station, Nia sat quietly in an interview room, her hands still trembling. She asked a single question over and over. "Did my mom make it?" When officers told her they didn't know, she lowered her head and whispered, "Tell the truth about everything." Angela Bates did not make it. Her death would soon ripple far beyond Grosvenor Road. It would reignite discussions in the Ohio House about House Bill 421, legislation aimed at addressing community trauma and gun violence prevention, bills inspired, in part, by victims just like her. But for those who knew her personally, the politics meant little. They remembered Angela as the mother who worked 2 jobs, who still found time to cook dinner for her children, who carried her grief quietly and prayed loudly. And they remembered the way she tried to protect her daughter until the end. In the days following the shooting, a memorial of candles and flowers appeared on the curb outside the house. Someone taped a handwritten sign to the tree out front. "She fought for peace. Rest now." The words caught in the wind, fluttering against the bark, as neighbors paused to read them. The investigation was only beginning, but for everyone on that street, the conclusion was already clear. Tragedy had taken root long before the first gunshot. As detectives traced the evidence backward, from a Ring camera to the 911 call, from a broken past to the night of violence, they began to uncover a portrait of generational trauma, untreated mental illness, and grief so deep it had turned inward. That portrait would soon define one of Ohio's most unsettling family murders in recent memory. The truth of what happened inside the Bates home on the night of April 26 did not rely on witness memory alone. It was recorded, silently unblinking, by the security cameras that Angela Bates had installed for peace of mind. The ring devices mounted on the staircase and entryway captured nearly every step of her daughter's descent into violence. The footage begins in near darkness. A narrow hallway, soft light bleeding from a bedroom upstairs. It is 9:32 p.m. The clock on the screen blinks once before steadying. A shadow moves across the landing. Nia Patterson, 19 years old, wearing dark clothing, phone in hand. She lingers at the top of the stairs, frozen in place, as though waiting for an answer that will never come. The first minutes are uneventful. Footsteps, a door closing, a faint sound of crying that the microphone barely catches. Then the stillness fractures. At 9:39 p.m., Nia descends the stairs. In her left hand glints the dark shape of a handgun. Her voice is low, words slur by anger and confusion. "Why you make me do this?" she mutters. She stops halfway down, looks back toward the camera, then continues out of frame. Seconds later, flashes of light, rapid, irregular, almost rhythmic, tear through the darkness. The microphone crackles, capturing 7 distinct gunshots before silence returns. The video ends with Nia's voice, not screaming, not panicking, praying. "Our Father, who art in heaven." It is one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence investigators would ever watch. A teenager standing over her dying mother, reciting the same prayer her mother once taught her. When officers arrived minutes later, their own body-worn cameras filled in what the security footage could not. The recordings show the front door ajar, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. "Police?" An officer calls. "Anybody inside?" No answer. Upstairs, flashlights sweep across the hallway. Angela Bates lies on her side, motionless. In the corner of the frame, her daughter kneels, hands raised, eyes unfocused. "Was there a gunshot?" An officer asks. "Yes," Nia replies. "Where's your firearm?" "I dropped it outside." "Did you shoot her?" "Yes, sir." The exchange lasts less than 15 seconds, but it seals the case before the investigation even begins. Officers handcuff her and guide her to the hallway wall. She obeys every command, murmuring apologies through shallow breaths. "I'm sorry she made me do this." Downstairs, another officer radios for medics. The house fills with noise, boots on tile, the hiss of radios, the sound of someone counting compressions. One paramedic later described the scene as eerily calm except for the prayer. They find 9 spent shell casings scattered across the upper hallway and staircase. Blood has pooled near the bedroom doorway. On the front lawn, a black semi-automatic pistol lies, half buried in grass. Investigators photograph everything. The weapon, the casings, the shoe prints, the faint marks on the wall where bullets tore through drywall. As they lead Nia outside, she begins speaking to herself. The body cam captures her fragmented sentences. Self-defense. That's what it was. Self-defense. Then a pause. "Just pray for me, y'all. I'll never kill nobody ever again." In the patrol car, she keeps talking, sometimes whispering, sometimes shouting. "I'm sorry, but that's what you deserve. I love y'all." Self-defense. Her voice wavers between anger and remorse, switching tone mid-sentence as though she is arguing with 2 people, her conscience and her guilt. When detectives later reviewed the footage, they noted how the gunfire appeared concentrated in one direction, not random. Forensic mapping showed that Angela had been facing away when at least 2 rounds struck her in the back. That pattern contradicted the claim of self-defense. It suggested a pursuit, not a struggle. At university hospitals, doctors fought to revive Angela, but the damage was too catastrophic. She died within an hour of the shooting. The coroner's report listed multiple gunshot wounds to the torso and upper back. Meanwhile, at the South Euclid police station, Nia's mental and physical state began to unravel. The footage from the holding area shows her seated against the wall, breathing heavily, her hands still cuffed. A female officer checks on her. "You start feeling lightheaded, you let me know, okay?" "Yes, ma'am." Moments later, Nia slides to the floor, saying she's about to have a seizure. The officer stays with her, guiding her to lie flat until paramedics arrive. "Take deep breaths, Nia." "Stay with me," the officer says. Nia whispers, "Trauma." Stress, my mom says I have ADHD, but the doctor said I don't. Paramedics load her onto a stretcher and into an ambulance. As they drive, she begins speaking again, more clearly now, more erratic. She killed my siblings, she tells a medic. That was for my siblings. She got them killed. The claim stuns everyone in the vehicle. Angela Bates, the victim, had in fact lost 3 of her children to shootings years earlier. Tragedies she had turned into advocacy for gun violence prevention. Yet in Nia's fractured retelling, her mother was somehow responsible. That night, investigators contacted Nia's father. He confirmed that his daughter had been struggling with mental health issues for years. She's been talking about killing people in her journal for months, he told police. She said she's been planning this for 3 months. I tried to get her help. He described previous incidents where she struck her younger brother, ran away, or threatened violence. Police records from 2019 and 2020 corroborated his story. Multiple calls from Angela reporting domestic disturbances and runaway incidents. The footage from that night, the ring cameras, the body cams, the holding room video, became the backbone of the prosecution's case. Together they created an unbroken chain of evidence from the moment Nia picked up the gun to the moment she confessed. There was no mystery, no ambiguity, no suggestion of an intruder, only a tragic portrait of a daughter unraveling under the weight of her own grief. In the days that followed, South Euclid residents watched the news in disbelief. This was a city that prided itself on calm streets and tight-knit families. But now, one of its own had been charged with murdering the very person who had given her life. Reporters revisited Angela's old public speaking clips, her appearances at vigils, her 2024 address during National Gun Violence Survivors Week. In those recordings, she spoke of resilience, of forgiveness, of breaking cycles. We can't lose another generation, she said. We have to love them through their pain. The cruel irony of her words hung heavy over every broadcast. By the 3rd day, police released a brief statement confirming that Nia Patterson had been arrested and charged with aggravated murder and a firearm specification. The department called it one of the most emotionally difficult cases in recent memory. The footage spread across online discussion boards and local news segments, though much of it was withheld from the public due to its graphic nature. What was shown was enough: a glimpse of suburban hallway, a flash of light, a whispered prayer. Every frame documented the collapse of family. Every sound captured the echo of a lifetime of pain condensed into minutes. Investigators continued collecting background evidence, phone data, text messages, psychiatric evaluations, but the truth had already been preserved by the cameras themselves. Technology had witnessed what humanity could not prevent. The following week, a small memorial appeared on the curb outside the home. Candles, flowers, photographs of Angela smiling with her children. Someone left a handwritten note beside the flickering lights. It read simply, "The cameras saw everything, but they couldn't stop it." As prosecutors prepared the case, they knew the images would be their most powerful witness. They didn't need speculation or motive to move a jury. They only needed the undeniable weight of the footage. A mother's last moments and a daughter's confession echoing through an empty house. For the investigators who watched it, those videos would never leave them. One officer later said, "It's the kind of scene you replay in your head for months. You hear the prayer, and you wonder if it was for forgiveness or for courage. The answer, like the tragedy itself, may never be fully understood, but the images and the silence that followed told the story in full. Long before the gunfire on Grosvenor Road, warning signs had been flashing in the Patterson-Bates household. They were small at first: arguments, police visits, worried phone calls, but they added up to a slow-motion emergency that no one managed to stop. What happened on April 26, 2024 was not the beginning of tragedy. It was its breaking point. Angela Bates had lived most of her adult life surrounded by loss. She was a mother of 6, a woman of faith, and a survivor of grief that would have undone most people. Between 2011 and 2022, 3 of her children were killed in separate, unrelated shootings. The first was her teenage son, caught in crossfire outside a Cleveland convenience store. The second, a daughter who was only 18, murdered during a domestic dispute. The third, another son, shot in a robbery gone wrong. Each loss carved a deeper wound into Angela's life, but she refused to surrender to despair. She turned her mourning into mission, speaking at community vigils, comforting other parents, advocating for change. Her speeches were not political performances. They were confessions of pain. "I shouldn't have to keep buying black dresses," she told a small crowd in 2023. "I shouldn't know the undertaker's first name." Those who met her said she radiated a mix of sorrow and resolve. She wanted peace. One neighbor later said she wanted her daughter to be okay. But peace inside her own home proved harder to find. By 2019, police had begun responding to calls from Angela's address. Reports of a teenage girl who had run away or refused to come home. The reports described escalating defiance, verbal fights, sometimes objects thrown. In 2020, another call recorded Angela's voice, strained and exhausted. "She's being disrespectful again. I just don't know what else to do." Officers noted no arrests, no visible injuries, and closed the reports with routine follow-ups. Each visit ended the same way. The house quieted for a few days. The system moved on. The teenager in those reports was Nia Patterson. At school, she was described as intelligent but withdrawn. Friends remembered moments of warmth followed by long periods of silence. Teachers noticed her slipping grades, a short temper, sudden absences. Counselors recommended therapy. But therapy costs money, and grief absorbs attention. Angela was juggling 2 jobs and raising the remainder of her children alone. Emotional resources were thin. Time was thinner. The cycle of tension stretched from months into years. By 2022, Nia's volatility had deepened. Her younger siblings grew afraid of her outbursts. One of them confided to their father, "She talks about killing people sometimes. It's scary." When he confronted her, she dismissed it as dark humor. But her notebooks, later seized during investigation, contained pages of unsettling thoughts, fragmented sentences about revenge, redemption, and voices that wouldn't quiet down. Whether those writings reflected fantasy, untreated trauma, or mental health crisis, no one intervened decisively. The system relied on voluntary treatment. Nia refused it. Her father tried to set boundaries. She moved in with him temporarily in 2023, hoping distance from her mother might calm the situation. It worked for a while. Then came the arguments over curfews, the late-night disappearances, the impulsive posts online hinting at despair. In early 2024, she returned to her mother's house. Angela welcomed her back, believing forgiveness might rebuild their bond. Neighbors later recalled seeing them together on the porch, talking quietly. "They looked like they were trying again," one said. "You'd never think they were fighting." But inside, unease had taken root. Family friends said Angela confided fears that her daughter's anger was turning darker. She'd find things broken in the house, or notice that Nia was awake all night, pacing. In March 2024, just a month before the murder, Angela spoke at a local church meeting about mental health stigma. She mentioned her own daughter indirectly. "Sometimes the ones we love most are the ones in the most pain." Those who heard her remembered the way her voice trembled when she said it. The tragedy that followed revealed just how alone she had been in that fight. When detectives reviewed the old case logs, they counted at least half a dozen prior police responses to her address between 2019 and 2020. None resulted in criminal charges or social service follow-ups. There was no standing mental health caseworker, no sustained counseling. Each call was treated as a domestic disturbance, nothing more. Experts who later studied the case called it a textbook example of unconnectedness, each agency seeing only a piece of the problem. The school saw defiance. Police saw misbehavior. The family saw rebellion. What they missed was a teenager sinking deeper into trauma after years of loss. Angela's grief, which had once fueled her activism, may have blinded her to the urgency of her daughter's unraveling. The week of the shooting, those tensions finally erupted. On Monday, April 22nd, Nia moved back into her mother's home. By Wednesday, neighbors heard Ray's voices at night. On Thursday morning, Angela told a co-worker she was tired but relieved that Nia seemed calmer. That evening, around 9 p.m., ring footage shows a teenager pacing near the door, leaving, returning, circling the same space as though trapped between guilt and rage. 20 minutes later, the gunshots began. Investigators believe the argument started upstairs. Evidence suggests Angela was facing away, perhaps trying to walk out, when the first bullet struck her in the back. 6 more followed. Nia's claim of self-defense would later be contradicted by trajectory analysis. The shots formed a downward pattern consistent with pursuit, not protection. The truth behind the confrontation may never be fully known. Some speculate that unresolved trauma from losing her siblings triggered an explosive episode. Others think resentment built over years of conflict. Whatever the cause, the result was irreversible. In interviews afterward, Nia's father spoke with anguish. "I told people she needed help," he said. "I tried. I really tried. But once she turned 18, you can't force nobody. You just pray they'll find their own peace." His words struck at a painful national reality. The gap between recognizing a mental health crisis and being able to intervene without an immediate threat to others. Authorities have limited power to compel treatment. By the time the threat becomes visible, it is often too late. Angela Bates's death exposed that failing in stark relief. Here was a woman who had already endured what most parents fear most, losing a child to violence, only to be killed by another. She had reached out for help countless times, to police, to friends, to her church. But the patchwork of systems meant to protect her could only react, never prevent. In the days after the shooting, community leaders organized a vigil outside the South Euclid police station. They spoke of generational trauma, of mothers raising children in the aftermath of grief. Candles flickered against the spring wind. Someone read from Angela's old speech. "When we ignore pain, it grows teeth." For a moment, silence filled the crowd, an acknowledgement that this time the pain had bitten back. Reporters began piecing together the backstory, publishing timelines that stretched 5 years before the murder. Editorials questioned how many warnings were enough. The Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office confirmed that earlier police interactions would be reviewed, but concluded that no actionable threats had been documented. It was a bureaucratic answer to a human disaster. Neighbors who had known Angela for decades struggled with guilt. "She told us Nia was acting strange," one woman said. "We told her it was just teenage stuff. We didn't know," another admitted. "We heard arguing, but you never think it'll end like that." For South Euclid, the case forced an uncomfortable reckoning. It revealed how grief can become inheritance, passed down like a curse, shaping the next tragedy before the last one is even buried. By the time detectives finished reviewing the past, they had built a timeline not of a single night, but a slow-building collapse. 2011, a son shot dead. 2018, another child lost. 2022, a daughter killed. 2024, the mother. Each entry a reminder that trauma is never confined to one generation. In the end, the story of those years reads less like a mystery and more like a warning. Angela's compassion could not heal her daughter's wounds. Nia's pain metastasized into violence. The institutions around them saw pieces, but never the whole picture. When investigators finally closed the file on the background portion of the case, one officer wrote in his summary, "This tragedy did not happen suddenly. It happened slowly, and no one stopped it." And with that, the groundwork was laid for the Courtroom chapter to come. A young woman facing life imprisonment, a family line extinguished, and a community left asking how many alarms must ring before someone listens. Friday, April 26, 2024, began like any other in the Bates household. Morning light slid through thin curtains, catching the framed photographs on the hallway wall. Angela's children smiling in older, happier times. She had spent that week working double shifts at a local care facility, still trying to keep her daughter close and her household steady. It was only Nia's 4th day back home after months of living with her father. Angela had told a co-worker that she felt hopeful but nervous. No one could guess that, before the sun set again, hope would collapse into tragedy. Throughout the day, nothing unusual happened. Cell phone data later analyzed by detectives showed Nia at home for most of the afternoon. Around 6 p.m., her messages turned agitated, short, clipped exchanges with friends about stress, and people always blaming me. One text read, "They think they know everything. They don't. Investigators never confirmed who the message referred to, but by evening the tone darkened. The next timestamp came at 9:12 p.m., the final message she would send that night. "I'm done." According to the Ring doorbell video, Angela returned home just before 9:20 p.m., carrying groceries. She set them on the counter and turned off the porch light. For about 10 minutes, a camera caught ordinary movements. Footsteps, the refrigerator door, television audio from another room. Then Nia appeared in the frame. She crossed the hall twice, phone in one hand, the other pressed to her head. Her mouth moved rapidly, though no one else was visible. Investigators would later freeze-frame that moment. Her pacing, her muttering, the unmistakable weight of agitation. At 9:31 p.m., the upstairs light flared on. Angela's voice echoed faintly, indistinct but calm. Neighbors later reported hearing a woman speaking in a firm but not angry tone. Nia's reply was louder. Then silence. 2 minutes later, she descended the stairs. The camera captured it all, her left hand clutching a black pistol, her right shaking. "Why you make me do this?" she muttered. The words were barely audible under the hum of the air conditioner. She stepped out of frame. The next thing the camera recorded was chaos. 7 sharp blasts, echoing through the walls. Then 3 more. The flash of muzzle fire lit the narrow stairwell in stuttering bursts, like lightning inside a storm. A final shot rang out, followed by the thud of a falling body. For nearly a full minute the frame held still. Then a shadow moved again. Nia re-entering, standing over what the investigators later identified as her mother's body. She whispered something unintelligible before lowering herself to the floor. "Our Father, who art in heaven." The audio fractured under the weight of the moment. Her voice small, childlike, repeating a prayer meant for comfort now wrapped in horror. At 9:43 p.m., a neighbor called 911 after hearing gunfire. Another reported seeing flashes through an upstairs window. Dispatchers relayed the call to South Euclid police units already patrolling nearby. Within 3 minutes, the first cruiser arrived. Body camera footage from that officer would later piece together the rest. The camera shakes slightly as he pushes open the front door. "Police? Anybody inside?" he shouts. No answer. The interior is silent, except for the low buzz of a television still playing in another room. He moves upstairs. The hallway floor is slick. The flashlight beam lands first on a pair of bare feet, then on a motionless body. "Ma'am, you here?" he calls out. Behind him, another officer spots movement. Nia, sitting against the wall, her eyes glazed. "Was there a gunshot?" "Yes." "Where's your firearm?" "I dropped it outside." "Did you shoot her?" "Yes, sir." The entire exchange lasts 14 seconds. It becomes the backbone of confession. The officers handcuff her without resistance, guide her to the landing, and begin CPR on Angela. Blood soaks the carpet, and one officer's voice breaks as he radios for paramedics. "Female victim, multiple gunshot wounds, unresponsive. Start medics now." The clock on his camera reads 9:48 p.m. As first responders flood the scene, Nia sits quietly on the hallway floor, her voice a broken rhythm of apology and denial. "She made me do this," she says. "I love y'all." When asked again where the gun is, she gestures toward the front lawn. Outside, officers recover a black semi-automatic pistol, lying beside a small flower bed. 9 spent shell casings are marked across the stairs and hallway. Bullet impacts show a consistent downward angle. The shots fire from above, striking a victim who is turning away. It is the detail that will later destroy the self-defense claim. In the footage, as paramedics carry Angela down the stairs, Nia begins to tremble. She murmurs, "Just pray for me, just pray for me." One officer answers softly, "We will." The cameras record every sound, the clatter of gurney wheels, the hiss of oxygen tanks, the distant wail of approaching sirens. By the time the ambulance doors close, the house has become a crime scene frozen in disbelief. Angela arrives at University Hospital's Cleveland Medical Center just after 10 p.m. trauma surgeons rush her into the operating room. Despite multiple transfusions and emergency surgery, she is pronounced dead at 10:57 p.m. The coroner's report lists 8 gunshot wounds, too fatal to vital organs. Forensic examination confirms a weapon recovered outside the home fired every recovered shell casing. Back at the station, Nia's demeanor unravels. In the holding cell, she complains of dizziness and says she's about to have a seizure. Officers ease her to the floor and call for medical support. As paramedics lift her onto the stretcher, she mutters words that would confuse investigators for days. She killed my siblings. That was for them. None of it makes sense. Her mother's past tragedies, 3 children lost to separate shootings, had made Angela an outspoken advocate against violence, not a perpetrator. Yet in her daughter's fractured mind, the grief seems to have twisted into blame. During the ambulance ride, she continues to repeat it. My mom got my siblings killed. That's why I did it. The medic, unsure how to respond, focuses on stabilizing her vitals. Later that night, Nia tells detectives that she had been hearing things and felt possessed by guilt. She calls the shooting self-defense but offers no evidence of an attack. Detectives begin their reconstruction. They analyze timestamps from both the ring footage and body cams. The shots were fired between 9:39 and 9:41 p.m. The 911 call came at 9:43. Police arrived 3 minutes later. The confession was recorded at 9:48. From a first flash of gunfire to Angela's final breath, only 18 minutes passed, a lifetime of family pain condensed into less than half an hour. Crime scene technicians spend the night documenting every inch of the house. They photograph bullet holes, blood patterns, and footprints. The following morning, the neighborhood wakes to flashing lights and news vans. A section of Grosvenor Road is blocked off. Reporters speak in hushed tones, repeating the same line. A daughter accused of killing her mother. As word spreads, the community reels. Neighbors who had attended Angela's church or seen her at a grocery store struggle to understand how a household marked by faith and resilience could end in such devastation. One woman who lived 2 doors away told reporters she loved that girl. No matter how bad things got, she never gave up on her. By the next day, the Cuyahoga County prosecutor announces the formal charges: aggravated murder with a firearm specification. Investigators confirm that Nia Patterson is being held without bond at the county jail pending psychiatric evaluation. The South Euclid Police Department releases a brief statement calling the incident a tragic reminder of the toll of untreated trauma. In the days following the shooting, Angela's extended family gathered to plan her funeral. Her surviving children traveled from across Ohio to attend. Outside the church, the crowd overflowed onto the sidewalk. Many wore white ribbons, a symbol of peace, and carried candles etched with her initials. Her eulogy spoke not of her death, but of her strength. The pastor read aloud one of her quotes from a speech early that year. "Grief doesn't end. It teaches us to love harder." That message hung over the congregation like a plea, because behind the hymns and prayers, everyone knew how cruelly the message had been reversed. That love had not been enough to save either of them. In court filings submitted later, prosecutors would note that the homicide was deliberate, evidenced by multiple shots fired at close range. They pointed to recovered footage, the confession, and the forensic trajectory analysis as proof of intent. The defense, meanwhile, requested mental health evaluations, citing a history of trauma, depression, and dissociative episodes. Both sides prepared for what would become one of the most emotionally charged courtroom proceedings in Cuyahoga County that year. For investigators, the reconstruction of that fatal night was not simply a technical exercise in forensics. It was an autopsy of heartbreak. Every timestamp, every bullet path, every captured prayer told a story that began years before anyone pulled a trigger. Angela Bates had spent her life trying to end gun violence. Her daughter became the reason another candlelight vigil was held. The night she died was not an accident of fate. It was the inevitable intersection of grief, mental illness, and access to a weapon. As the police closed their reports and the prosecutors built their case, the city of South Euclid was left with a single unanswerable question. If the warning signs had been seen for years, how did no one stop the countdown? For a full year after that April night, the case of State of Ohio versus Nia Patterson sat heavy on the docket of the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. The facts were clear, the evidence undeniable. What remained was a human question: how to sentence a daughter who had confessed to killing the mother she claimed to love. In the months after the arrest, prosecutors built their case meticulously. They assembled the ring footage, the 911 audio, the body camera transcripts, and the forensic analyses that charted every shot. The evidence left little room for ambiguity. Nia's fingerprints were on the gun. The bullets matched the recovered weapon. The confession was recorded in full. But this was not a case the state approached with triumph. Even the investigators called it an unrelenting tragedy. As proceedings began in early 2025, public attention turned again to the Bates family. Angela's friends and surviving children filled the courtroom benches, sitting beneath the fluorescent lights that turned grief into spectacle. On the defense side, Nia appeared small and withdrawn, her hands cuffed loosely in front of her. Her hair was shorter than in the footage. Her face looked older. When she entered, she did not look toward the gallery. Court documents later revealed that Nia had undergone multiple psychiatric evaluations during her pretrial confinement at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. Doctors describe her as lucid but emotionally blunted, capable of understanding proceedings but detached from the magnitude of her actions. One report concluded that she suffered from complex trauma related to her siblings' deaths and an untreated mood disorder. But the final assessment found her competent to stand trial. The prosecution's opening statements were brief and clinical. They relied on the visuals no one could dispute. The footage of her descending the stairs with a gun, her own words in patrol car, the forensic patterns showing shots fired into her mother's back. The lead prosecutor told the court, this was not self-defense. This was an execution carried out in the one place where this victim should have been safest, her own home. The defense did not argue innocence. Instead, they pleaded for understanding. They spoke of Nia's upbringing, of her exposure to trauma from an early age, of years of cumulative grief that hollowed her sense of self. She is not a monster, her attorney said quietly. She is a product of pain that went unhealed for too long. They presented records of counseling attempts, notes from school counselors warning of suicidal ideation, and testimony from her father describing her as a child lost to trauma. In the courtroom that week, the silence was thick. The public gallery rarely moved. Even the reporters, accustomed to tragedy, wrote slowly. On May 16, 2025, after months of hearings and private evaluations, Nia Patterson stood before Judge Carl Mazzone and entered a guilty plea. There would be no trial, no witnesses, no cross-examinations. Her voice shook as she said, guilty to murder with a firearm specification. The plea was part of an agreement that removed the possibility of a capital charge. When the judge asked if she understood that she would spend much of her life in prison, she nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. He asked if anyone had coerced her. No, sir. She said she was sorry. The apology was almost inaudible. 3 weeks later, on June 6, 2025, the courtroom filled again for sentencing. Rows of people, family, neighbors, advocates, even police officers, gathered to see the final chapter close. The prosecutor read aloud a portion of Angela Bates's 2024 speech at National Gun Violence Survivors Week, the one where she urged Ohio lawmakers to break the cycle that had claimed her children. As those words echoed through the courtroom, the irony was unbearable. When it was time for the sentence, Judge Mazzone spoke slowly, his tone measured but firm. Ms. Patterson, the court recognizes the trauma in your history, but the law also recognizes the sanctity of a mother's life. This was a deliberate act of violence against the person who loved you most. It ended a life devoted to helping others survive the very thing that took hers. For that, the court imposes a sentence of life in prison with eligibility for parole after 18 years. No one in the room cheered, no one protested. The sentence landed not like justice, but like final silence. Nia was let out by deputies without turning back. Outside the courthouse, Angela's family faced reporters with quiet dignity. Her sister spoke first. Angela believed in forgiveness, she said. She wanted peace for her community. We just pray that her story makes someone listen before another family gets to this point. The microphones captured her trembling voice before she turned away, tears streaking down her mask. For the people of South Euclid, the sentencing did not end the grief. It only deepened the paradox. Angela Bates had been the face of resilience, a mother who lost 3 children to shootings and still stood before crowds to demand an end to gun violence. Her death, and who caused it, became a symbol of how cyclical trauma devours itself. Her funeral had been packed months earlier, but vigils continued. In the summer of 2025, activists gathered at a Cleveland community center for a memorial in her name. The podium stood under a banner that read, "Break the Cycle." For Angela, speakers talk about generational pain, domestic gun access, and the growing number of youth-on-parent homicides nationwide. Across Ohio, lawmakers revived parts of House Bill 421, a proposal Angela had once supported, aimed at funding trauma response networks and early intervention for at-risk youth. During one session, a representative quoted her directly, "Grief doesn't end. It teaches us to love harder." The line was entered into the state record. Back inside the prison system, Nia's adjustment was slow. She spent her first months in the mental health unit of the Ohio Reformatory for Women. In her intake assessment, she listed reading, drawing, and praying as her daily activities. When asked what she hoped to do one day, she wrote, "Tell people not to make my mistake." Her story remains one of the most haunting in recent Ohio history, not because of its brutality, but because of how preventable it may have been. The police reports from years earlier showed a family crying out for help. The mental health screenings, the journal entries, the repeated mentions of fear, all pointed to a crisis unfolding in slow motion. The system saw each incident as isolated. No one saw the pattern until it was carved into tragedy. Experts who analyzed the case later called it a mirror of America's most urgent problems. Untreated mental illness, gun availability, and intergenerational trauma had converged in one home. The result was not only a homicide, but a collapse of meaning. A mother killed by the violence she had dedicated her life to ending. In South Euclid, the house on Grosvenor Road remains quiet. The front porch is empty now, the grass overgrown. The mailbox still bears the family's last name. To the neighbors, it's become a quiet monument, a reminder that tragedy does not always arrive from outside. Sometimes it grows from within. Each April, a small group of residents gathers there to light candles. They recite the same prayer Angela's daughter once whispered into the silence of that house. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." For some, it is a prayer for peace. For others, it is a plea for understanding, that the next Nia might find help before heartbreak becomes history. The footage from that night, the hallway, the gunfire, the trembling voice, is now locked away in the archives of the South Euclid Police Department. It will remain evidence, not memory. But for those who watched it, it never fades. They remember the sound of a mother's voice moments before it was lost, the flicker of a daughter's confusion, and the final echo of a prayer that still hangs in quiet air over Grosvenor Road. Angela Bates once stood before a crowd and said, "We have to be the light in the darkness." Her life ended in that darkness, but her story still burns, a warning, a wound, and a hope that someone somewhere is finally paying attention.